help prepare our minds for Brother Caleb's lesson this morning for us. He's chosen Jeremiah 17, the first four verses. Jeremiah 17, the first four verses. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron and with the point of a diamond. It is graven upon the table of their heart and upon the horns of their altars, your altars. Whilst their children remember their altars and their groves by the green trees upon the high hills. O my mountain in the field, I will give thy substance, and all thy treasures to the spoil, and thy high places for sin throughout all thy borders, and thou, even thyself, shalt discontinue from thine heritage that I gave thee, and I will cause thee to serve thine enemies in the land which thou knowest not, for ye have kindled a fire in mine anger, which shall burn forever.
Good morning. If you haven't yet, go ahead and open up to Jeremiah chapter 17. That's where we'll be for pretty much the duration of the lesson this morning. Hope you're all having a good day. Hopefully you don't have to suffer through the winter in April and May, June, however long this nightmare is going to last outside. But I was told I was on spring break, but I think they should just call it break from now on because that's anything but spring out there. But it is good to be out here with you all. I think I should get credit for showing up today. Anyone that watches Purdue basketball knows that I am in a place of emotional distress and utter sadness, and I called Gene to see if I could get a day off, but I guess I made it. So anything that happens after this, if it's terrible, you'll at least know the reason why. But I also picked the lessons themselves this morning and this evening. I want you to know have nothing to do with what happened in the Purdue game. It just so happens that I was talking about the depraved man, and I was talking about the vanity of all things. That literally has nothing to do with that. So please don't come up and ask me. This has nothing to do with any separate, unimportant topics that may have occurred in the last couple of days. But it is good to be here. Jeremiah chapter 17 is kind of a fascinating chapter. And, the scripture reading that Larry just read for us is kind of an interesting point to start out with. Because Jeremiah is a prophet who is sent to the kingdom of Judah near the final days, the final years of that kingdom before it eventually is taken over into captivity by Babylon. And it kind of mentions this, how at the start of Jeremiah, talks about during the time of Josiah, during the time of Jehoiakim, all these kings who came near the end of the line. And Jehoiakim is actually one of the kings who is taken off into bondage in chains by the Babylonian kingdom and empire. So we know that this is near the end. And so there is a lot of messages by Jeremiah about the coming judgment to this kingdom. And we've already, historically have come across the judgment to the kingdom of Israel, or the northern kingdom, taken over by Assyria. And so now it is the time of the southern kingdom of Judah to face the music, as it were. But there's some interesting language in chapter 17 that was just in the scripture reading and also kind of following in the verses after that Jeremiah talks about to describe these people. And so when talking about the idea of the depraved man, and I'm not going to get into this whole, I know there's, the total depravity of man discussion about is man, always predisposed to be evil and all that. That's not where I'm going with this lesson, but just talking about what does sin actually do to the man, to us as people, to us as individuals in this life. What does sin actually do? What must sin do? Because I think this chapter really touches on what sin does to us. What sin if it was a personified entity, if it was an actual being, what sin actually does. And so let's just read those first few verses again. I wanted to kind of set with you again and see if maybe some things pop out in the language that Jeremiah uses. The sin of Judah is written with a pen of iron, with a point of a diamond. It is engraved on the tablet of their heart and on the horns of their altars. While their children remember their altars and their Asherim beside every green tree and on every high hill, on the mountains in the open country, your wealth and all your treasures I will give for spoil as the price of your high places for sin throughout all your territory. You shall loosen your hand from your heritage that I gave to you, and I will make you serve your enemies in a land that you do not know. For in my anger a fire is kindled that shall burn forever. And we'll kind of carry on reading some verses after that. But I hope you see a certain descriptive language that begins right off the bat that should pique your interest and make you think, I've heard this kind of terminology before. Stylus or a pen of iron, tablets. What's the imagery we're supposed to be getting here? We're supposed to see the commandments, right? We're supposed to see the law of God in this situation. And this is why the first thing that is being discussed here in relation to sin is this shows that sin must make a mockery of righteousness. Sin in its very form has to mock that which it is transgressing. And I think we live in an era where we are surrounded by things that must transgress the logical and the true. Do we agree with that? The things that we see on an everyday basis, because things have gone so crazy out there, where you can be anything you want to be, all right? You're no longer the gender that you were born with. You no longer have to adhere to the very basic scientific principles that make up the things we see around us. You can decide what's right and wrong. That in its very nature is going to mock the actual truth that it is flying in the face of, right? That's what lies do. When you put lies up against truth, you realize lies are just total conflict with truth. Okay, and what this is talking about here is sin in this situation. What the people of Judah have done is they have taken the true, pure, righteous law of God and they've made a mockery of it. And so that's why Jeremiah uses this descriptive language here to describe it as if it were the words of God, but instead they have tainted it. Yes, you have taken the stylus, you have taken the pen of iron, written with diamond, and you have written on tablets, but you have written with evil intentions. You have written with idolatrous motivations. So no longer is it the word of God written on these tablets, it's these false gods that you have adopted. And this is important because what Jeremiah is relating to, if you jumped back all the way to the book of Deuteronomy, when we talk about what is this law that God has given down to the people of Israel, what he talks about is in Deuteronomy chapter 6, verses 6 through 9, this is what is said there. This is what's been written. These words I am commanding to you today are to be upon your hearts. Notice that parallel there to what was just mentioned in Jeremiah 17. And you shall teach them diligently to your children, and speak of them when you are sitting at home, and when you walk along the road, when you lie down, and when you get up. Tie them as reminders on your hands, and bind them on your foreheads. Write them on the doorposts of your houses and on your gates. So this is how the word of the Lord is supposed to be made precious to the people. It is supposed to be everywhere around them. They are supposed to hold on to it as dearly as any possession they have. They are supposed to value it above everything else. And talks about specifically not just for themselves, but teaching it to your children. This is the true heritage that you want to hold on to. This is what you are truly passing on to your kids, not your wealth, all right? Not your gene pool, not how tall you are, not having long hair, short hair, no hair, all right? This is what you pass on, is the word of the Lord. This is what goes on to the end. And then we jump back to Jeremiah and we see that they kept some things, right? They kept things and they passed those down and they taught those to their children. But it wasn't the word of the Lord. What they wrote upon their children's hearts, what they wrote upon this permanent heritage that they passed down is the evil, is the idolatrous, is the wicked. And you might be asking, all right, Caleb, you skipped over a point from Deuteronomy. What were the words that they were supposed to remember? What are these words that God was commanding them today? Well, that's from verse 4. This is what the words are. Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. And you shall love the Lord your God with all of your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength. And notice, now they have abandoned that. At this point in time, through the years, through the splitting of the kingdom to the point that we're at now, the northern kingdom's gone, the southern kingdom remains, but it's on the doorstep of judgment here, and they've forgotten that. They've forsaken the one God, the true God, and now they've bought into all these other gods. All these other gods that when they were brought into the land, hey, don't adhere to these other kingdoms and to what they believe in and what they value and how they live their lives. You know what? Eliminate them, cut them out. This is what they will do. And sure enough, they allowed these other kingdoms to persist, even to the point where Solomon allows these kingdoms to be infused with his kingdom by marrying all these other wives, and he falls into idolatry. And eventually, when he dies, the kingdom is at kind of a weak point when Rehoboam takes over and the kingdom splits. So we see that what God was trying to teach the people in Deuteronomy, what the purpose of this law was something that would preserve them. And sin festered its way in there and has now made a mockery of that. Not only will we take advantage and be written on your hearts instead of the word of God, but you will no longer serve one God, you will serve many gods. All right, and it talks about the Asherah and the high hills, the green trees. That's in relation to Deuteronomy chapter 12. And I'll just read that real quick. In Deuteronomy chapter 12, this is what it says in verse 2. Destroy completely all the places where the nations you are dispossessing have served their gods, atop the high mountains, on the hills, and under every green tree. Tear down their altars, smash their sacred pillars, burn up their Asherah poles, cut down the idols of their gods, and wipe out their names from every place. You shall not worship the Lord your God in this way. And I think there's kind of an interesting language with that too in Deuteronomy, because sometimes it wasn't just that the people always necessarily believed they were worshiping another god, but they became twisted in their mindset of, how do we worship God? And I think a good example of that is back in the Exodus when they're fleeing into the wilderness and they come to Mount Sinai and Moses leaves them to go get the law, and he comes back and they're serving this golden calf, right? Well, they didn't believe the golden calf was some other god. They believed this was the God that had delivered them from Egypt. That's how Aaron presents it to them. Hey, behold, this is the God who has delivered us out of the land of Egypt. They were serving who they thought was God in their own way, right? So it wasn't always just a matter of them serving Baal or serving Molech or serving these other gods. I mean, and they do that, and that happens over the course of time. But sometimes they serve God in the way that they wanted to serve God, even though they might say it was the true God. But they were going to serve him however they wanted to. And so God's kind of illustrating that here back in Deuteronomy when he's saying, like, hey, even if you say you're giving this praise and this idol worship, which it really was idol worship and these false types of sacrifices, even if you say it's coming to me, this is not how you will worship me. This is not how you will obey me in this situation. You will not build up these high places and do it in the manner in which these false idolatrous kingdoms have done. But that's what sin does. Sin makes a mockery of what it's transgressing. Sin has to do that. It has to fly in the face of the good, of the righteous. That by its very nature has to be done. So the wicked symbols replace the traditions of God. And so idolatry replaces true godly worship. And you can spend plenty of time reading through scriptures about how dumb idolatry really is. And the Bible does a good job of basically saying, this is a block of wood that you're worshiping. The kind of thing you cook bread on, all right, that you burn and cook bread with, that's the thing you're worshiping right now. Like, so the Bible does a good job of not making idolatry seem like, oh yeah, that's an easy mistake to make. It's like, no, it lets us know, like, if you're bowing down to a wooden statue, you're bowing down to the same thing that people cook bread with, basically, you know. So God's definitely not looking at this lightly, not appreciating the way in which people have perverted their children. You know, that's a key thing here. And I don't have kids, and so I can't speak to this to the same authority that some of you parents can, especially. But I can imagine there is nothing that would hurt you more than to feel like your kid's instruction has been tailored to deceive them, right? I think having the trust in the education system they're in, having the trust of the Bible classes they're in, having trust in the homes that they're in is of vital importance to make sure that the parents, the teachers, the educators of them in whatever situation they're in, to make sure that it is an authentic, true education in whatever field, secular or godly focused. We want to make sure that it's true, because what the people of Israel have done have continually tainted their children by passing on evil, wicked traditions, to the point that now, instead of writing the law of God on their hearts, they're writing the law of false gods, of false idolatrous peoples. So sin must make a mockery of things, and kind of in keeping with that, and I think most of us would agree, probably this is the top thing that sin does to us when we get to kind of step back and see ourselves afterwards, is sin must deceive. The reason we get into sin, honestly, and I don't think it matters what sin it is, sin deceives us. At its very core, the most true thing about sin is that it deceives us. The first sin occurred because it was deceiving Eve and Adam, right? It deceived them. And in a way, they were given what they were promised, but they weren't given what they thought they were going to get. Sin is going to deceive people. It promises something that it can't really give. And so I kind of want to jump down just after what we've read. Verse 5 says, "Thus says the Lord, cursed is the man who trusts in man. Cursed is the man who trusts in man and makes flesh his strength, whose heart turns away from the Lord. He is like a shrub in the desert and shall not see any good come. He shall dwell in the parched places of the wilderness, in an uninhabited salt land. Blessed is the man who trusts in the Lord, whose trust is the Lord. He is like a tree planted by water that sends out its roots by the stream, and does not fear when heat comes, for its leaves remain green, and it is not anxious in the year of the drought, for it does not cease to bear fruit. The heart is deceitful above all things, and desperately sick. Who can understand it? I, the Lord, search the heart and test the mind, to give every man according to his ways, according to the fruits of its deeds." So, a lot in there to unpack, and you could take this a lot of different ways, but I think it's interesting that verse in verse 9, when it talks about the heart is deceitful above all things, right? And I believe, there are some things where you could have topics where you could talk about, some people could talk about drug abuse, some people could talk about alcoholism, some people could talk about pornographic addiction, some people could talk about, whatever, being, laziness, some people could talk about whatever you might be dealing with, all right, lying, who knows? We all have had that moment where, what gave us over to that temptation? What caused us to steep into that mess? All right, and maybe we get down so far down the line we don't really remember what the first instigating moment was. but it's usually something that sin specifically promised us, or we believed that it was promising that it could give, and we thought it could give without really any true consequence, right? Because we don't usually consider the consequences too much when we dive into sin. And certainly when we dive into sin, that eventually latches on and creates an addictive connection, right? We think there's a true gift that's at the end of this path, or something that is going to have a gift without much cost to it, right? And that very thought always deceives us. That very thought always is what is being lied about to us. That's how Satan gets into our minds is, hey, yeah, maybe this isn't right. Maybe you know this isn't right, but it's not that big a deal. Like you're not hurting anyone. It's not going to hurt you. Okay, this is a victimless sin, right? Something like that. We've probably told ourselves that. I don't know a lot of people who have, the more popular sins of like, yeah, I've never met someone who, hey, I'm in prison now. I murdered someone, and now I have to deal with the consequences of the, we probably don't know a lot of people like that, but, there are people who have done that. There are people who live with that. I'm sure a lot of us have those more everyday sins where, yeah, I'm not going to get pulled over and put in handcuffs and hauled off to jail for the rest of my life. But maybe that can still cause the same amount of damage spiritually in the long run, because I allow it to fester and grow and allow it to go unperceived as a threat in my life. And that's kind of how the people of Israel are here. And how did they get to this point where now they're telling their children, they're writing these laws of man-made gods on their hearts as opposed to the laws of God? Well, it wasn't because of one grand shift all at once, right? It was, hey, God said don't marry outside the people of Israel, and then they started doing that. And then, hey, my wife or, my husband, their family worships this other god, or they worship in this way. They offer sacrifices like this, or they have this idol that sits in their family room, and they all go and worship it. And then things just slowly start changing. All right, and the deceitfulness of, hey, just a slight change here isn't making a big deal. Hey, just little tiny shifts over time. There's no consequence. There's no real victim in this. There's nothing that's going to suffer because of this. But the truth is there is. The truth is the people, and this is the way in which sin has deceived the people of Israel and the people of Judah, is the people tried to assimilate with all these other groups because they thought, this is how we will live long in the land. And the one thing God told them is what we just read in Deuteronomy, is the fact of, hey, the Lord's your God, the Lord is one, you'll love me with all your strength, with all your soul, and all your might. And he always said over and over and over again, do this that you may live long in the land. But when the people encountered conflict with other nations, they thought, we're not going to do what God said to preserve ourselves in the land. We're going to preserve ourselves based on the common, hey, community aspect. Hey, how do we get along with these people and make it all work out? That's how we survive. Let's get along with the Canaanites. Let's not get in any troubles with them. Hey, they're bigger than us. They're stronger than us. Let's be buddies. All right? I want to have some strong allies. God told them, separate yourself. Eliminate these people. These people will cause you to not live long. And the very thing the people were looking for is, hey, fester and grow this relationship. Fester, probably not. Like, cultivate this relationship with these people. This is how we survive. This is how we'll live long in the land. The very thing they thought they were going to preserve and grow and allow to cultivate into something successful is the very thing that would be their downfall. The reason they did not live long in the land is because they did what they thought was ensuring that. And that's kind of the paradox of life, right? Everything in our being, everything that we have inside of us tells us about self-preservation, to build ourselves up, to enhance ourselves and our own capabilities. That is how I preserve and grow and survive. Gospels and we read God's Word, and it says, actually, you want to know how to survive? You want to know how to preserve your life, how to preserve the life of your children, how to live long in the land and live long or live forever, is to give it up. To give yourself up. It's the opposite of what your inner thoughts are telling you, right? The nature inside of you, the physical nature, the fleshly nature is telling you, is, hey, don't preserve you. Preserve the message of God. Preserve Jesus. Promote Jesus. Give yourself up and preserve Jesus. Preserve the message that he inspired. Preserve the message that he gave. So it's kind of this awkward inner conflict, right? And so sin is trying to deceive you back to maybe what your fleshly mind is telling you. And what it told Judah and what it told all those kings is that, hey, we have to preserve through these means. And if you ever have time, read through some of the Kings and Chronicles, especially when you see how the kings, there's always success when it talks about, and so consulted the word of the Lord. And then see what happens when so-and-so did not consult the word of the Lord. And oftentimes, there will be kings who would go and make alliances with other kingdoms, plans with other kingdoms. And those plans would not become fruitful. Despite the fact they thought, hey, I cultivate this alliance with this other kingdom to preserve Israel, to preserve Judah. And instead, it would only hinder and hurt their kingdom. And so it's kind of ties in with the way in which sin works. Sin must be deceptive, and it is deceptive, and that's how it gets us. And so that's what Jeremiah is talking about here to the people. And, just because I don't want it to be a whole downer lesson of, oh yeah, we've all been deceived, we've all been misled by sin, right? We've all made a mockery of what we know is right by sinning and giving over to that temptation at some point in time. We've all had our moments like the people of Judah here who, we put the wrong things first, we did the wrong things in secret, however you want to describe it, thinking in your own specific situations, right? We've had that happen, okay? It's happened to the point, and so frequently, right? I think we try not to think too much about the judgment day when we imagine, like, what if everybody, as we're getting in, can you imagine if everybody knew everything I did before I got in? Theoretically, if I'm at the judgment and every one of you was in line behind me and you all got to see up on the PowerPoint and it just went through, this is what you did. Like, how many of you wish you were surrounded by people from different countries that were in line? I'm guessing you probably wouldn't want to have people that you go to church with, that you worship with, that you grew up with, probably sitting there watching behind you, right? So it's weird. It's weird thinking about sin because I can only think about it for myself, and I'm sure each of you in the same way. Like, you read these stories about Judah and the kingdoms and how God talks about, brand groups of people into sin in general. But in a lot of ways, I can only think of sin as it pertains to me. I can only think about how do I actually view sin? And just sitting there and kind of dwelling on that. And so when Jeremiah is talking to all these people and what they've done, it's hard for me not to think about, it's like, all right, if Jeremiah was saying these things to me, how did I write with, the diamond pen, with the iron stylus? How did I write, false things on my heart? How did I do wicked in the eyes of the Lord? How did I abandon, the law of God? And I think I've got a lot on the top of my head that I could easily rattle off that I've done, right? And I think most of us have a lot we got it on speed dial, right? Like, we don't want to tell anybody, even the ones that are small. We're like, you get mad about something. Everybody's probably said something in anger to someone or something, right? A stop sign. I can't tell you how many times I've yelled at a stoplight for no reason other than it's like, why are you here? Why is this yellow? Everybody has that one stoplight on the way to work or on the way home or something where it's like the other route that has nobody on it always gets like a 50-second, green light. It's like, why is there 50 seconds for this road? Nobody's on this road, right? And we just have to sit there and hate the universe, right? But then, like, you get the green and you're like, have moments like that where we're just angry, and it's usually a root cause of something else, but it's just the truth, right? We have common everyday occurrences like that. Not every day is it the grandest of grand weakness moments that I have, but it's the everyday things. It's like, yeah, I probably should have done that at work today, but I put it off again. I probably could have helped out so-and-so, but you know what, they didn't really ask me, and they're not going to get mad at me, but I know I could have done more, but I didn't. Like, there's just little things like that we encounter more on a daily basis and can relate to. But just looking at sin as a whole, the mockery it makes, the deception it tells to us, the mockery it makes to God, right? That's what God sees, is the mockery. We often see the deception. We often see how sin deceives. But the one good thing, and Jeremiah brings this up here in chapter 17, is that this sinning, this mockery, this deception, that it comes to an end, right? And so I try and, if I want to call this a downer lesson in some ways, I think the uplifting part or whatever, the wrap-up point always has to be somewhat of a upbeat thing, but sin ends, right? You often read about these long passages where it's just like, man, this is bad, this is bad, this is bad, and you're just like, all right, where's the good line, where's the good line? Like, where's the line we put on our fridge or get framed to put in the hallway, walk into the kitchen, right? And after we go through those first, 10, 11 verses, we get to verse 12. Let's read in verse 12 of chapter 17 with me, please. It says, "A glorious throne set on high from the beginning is the place of our sanctuary. O Lord, the hope of Israel, all who forsake you shall be put to shame. Those who turn away from you shall be written in the earth, for they have forsaken the Lord, the fountain of living water. Heal me, O Lord, and I shall be healed. Save me, and I shall be saved, for you are my praise. Behold, they say to me, where is the word of the Lord? Let it come. I have not run away from being your shepherd, nor have I desired the day of sickness. You know what comes out of my lips. It was before your face, but not a terror to me. Be not a terror to me. You are my refuge in the day of disaster. Let those be put to shame who persecute me, but let me not be put to shame. Let them be dismayed, but let me not be dismayed. Bring upon them the day of disaster. Destroy them out of destruction." So Jeremiah kind of wraps up here, and then he kind of completes the chapter talking about the Sabbath day and keeping the Sabbath day and the importance of that. But he kind of wraps up here talking about the relationship with God. Going back to the relationship with God, because that's what, sin at its core is supposed to be about, right? How does it make a mockery? It makes a mockery of how God has tried to connect with us, how he's made it a pathway for us to connect with him through his law, through how we worship him. And then how does it deceive it? It deceives us into thinking that we are no longer, transgressing that relationship, that we are no longer separating ourselves from that, right? But ultimately, God's going to put an end to that. And when there is no more of that sin that separates or mocks or deceives us, then, if we find ourselves on the other side and there's nothing there that's tempting us away from that relationship, then if we end it all without that relationship, we're going to have that ultimate regret, right? We're going to have that ultimate time in the day of destruction, that terror in the day of destruction, when nothing else is tempting us, nothing else is pulling us away from God. All we have to do is sit in and realize that we were deceived. We made a mockery of that relationship. We spat in the face of God while he was trying to reach out his hand. And yet, those of us, when we actually strive for that relationship, when we actually strive to follow after God, then we have all these comforts here that Jeremiah is talking about, that he's talking about it as in his own relationship here with God. Conserve me, protect me, preserve me in the day of this destruction. He keeps talking about all these languages in which, hey, everyone else might get destroyed, but preserve me. Everyone else might be shamed, but do not let me be put to shame. This is one thing I guess I can relate to a little bit. I don't want to keep bringing up this game on Friday, but there is kind of the funny thing with sports, right, as a fan, is there's part of you that you want to win, right? But there's also that kind of that athlete's mindset of like, oh, I hate lose even more than I love winning, which I've never understood that until like you lose embarrassingly, right? And then you have to sit in that embarrassment. You have to sit in that shame of everyone being like, oh yeah, I know you. You're that teenager that got beat by your 5-year-old sibling, right? Like the shame of that, right? I know because I was a younger sibling, and you made your older siblings feel the shame whenever you beat them at something. That is all you live for, is to embarrass them and to make them feel horrible about themselves. That is what younger siblings were born for, okay? But when you sit in the shame of things like that and you're like, everyone is laughing at us. Everyone is laughing at our fandom or me specifically. I just airballed this shot. I have to sit in the shame of it, of knowing everyone's laughing at me because they think in the same situation they would do better, right? I wouldn't do that, right? And that's kind of the idea I try and think about the relationship with God. Of when it talks about shame, and it talks about, can you imagine having eternal shame for making one choice incorrectly, but it was the biggest choice of your life, to serve God or to serve yourself, and then you have to live in that shame forever. It's like, man, just living with the shame of knowing that we are the second team ever to lose to a 16 seed. The last 2 days have been terrible, and I told Gina, I was not wearing any Purdue things yesterday. I was like, no one was going to know I was a Purdue fan because I couldn't have myself flipping out at the cashier at the movie theater and being like, Purdue fan flips out at local Regal Cinemas and is arrested or whatever. And certainly that would have been bad for making it here today, right? But the truth is the idea of sitting in shame is difficult, right? It's a difficult thing to do, and we try and get out of it as quickly as I got to do something else good. I got to I got to fix the wrongs. And so when it talks about that shame, and when Jeremiah's talking, guys, like, let me not be put to shame. He knows he's not going to be put to shame. He knows God's not going to let him down or, fail in his task. And so that's the comfort for all of us. We're not going to be left on the hook. We're not going to be responsible for our own success in this situation. God's going to bail us out here. If we stick to him, we're not going to be there at the end and be like, oh, what a waste. Despite the fact, and Jeremiah mentions this too, notice how he kind of takes the idea of what people are going to say in verse 15. Where is the word of the Lord? Let it come. Okay, let it happen. People keep talking about the judgment day, and it's kind of just a joke, right? Anywhere in popular culture, any social media, movies, you notice how everybody that believes in the judgment day is always like a crazy lunatic in any movie? You always notice that? It always has to be some crazy person be like, the kingdom of heaven is at hand. Well, they're always like crazy, all right? They're never just a calm person who's actually caring about it. Because that's how people view us, right? People that are doing whatever they want now, that are actually sitting in shame, that are engaging in things that are going to put them to shame, they're going to call us crazy and stupid and losers and psychopaths or racist or, transphobic, homophobic, whatever. They're going to call us all these names because it's the deception of sin. It's the mockery of sin. All these things are just putting off what they're so afraid of, okay, which is dealing with their relationship to God. They're going to mock us. They're going to hate us, right? Obviously, we got to do our own part to love them, to care about them, to be seeking after their well-being. But that's why public persona is always just, we're crazy, we hate people, we want them all to be burned in hell and blah. It's the only way they can deal with it. It's how you avoid dealing with the truth. But we can't do the same thing for ourselves when we're doing the wrong things. And just, not that big a deal, I'm fine, I go to church, I read my Bible, I can get drunk when I want to, it's okay, I still love God. I can, not teach my kids the Bible, hey, let them do their own thing. I can watch porn, or I can, get addicted to this drug or that or whatever, or, it's okay. I still love God. Like, don't get deceived. Like, we can fall into the same trap. But we don't want to be caught up in that shame when, all is said and done. We want God to protect us from that. So, just kind of an interesting chapter in Jeremiah. Tonight we're going to talk a little bit about Solomon's experience in life, what Solomon deems as like the end of the matter when all things are considered, looking at life, looking at what the importance of life is. So I think if you can come back tonight, that would be great. Just looking at things I think relate to all of us. But just in the situation here with Jeremiah and extending the Lord's invitation, write the word of the Lord on your heart. Teach it to your children. Let them teach it to their children. That's the greatest thing that you can pass along. All right? And those that aren't our children, those aren't related to us, we're trying to continue that passing along in the same way, right? That's what we're reaching out for. That's how the gospel spreads. Let people write it on their hearts, let it change their lives, and we believe that it will change their life. And so we don't have to worry about if it's successful. We know it will be successful. So we just got to give it the opportunity to spread. So thank you all for listening. If you have any need at this time, if you have any prayers that need to be offered on your behalf, whatever your situation may be, now is the time.